So I'm Oscar. I'm a master student in computer science, and yes, last year I was a participant in Hack4Good, and with Antoine, actually, I worked with the geese.
Yeah, so I'm a master student in data science, and last year we did Hack4Good together in fall.
Could one of you maybe explain a bit about what Hack4Good is and what the program entails, so to speak?
So Hack4Good is an 8-week long hackathon where we try to work on real projects brought to us by NGOs. And the aim is to apply the data science skills we learn at school in an impactful and real-world project.
That sounds lovely. And what exactly did you work on?
So our team worked with the German Development Agency, and we worked on a project aimed at helping small-scale farmers in Western Kenya grow their farm in a sustainable way. So improve the sustainability of their agricultural practice, improve agricultural outputs, and we had data sets that were built around this.
Excellent. And what exactly were these data sets, and what was the outcome in the end?
So the data sets were from surveys the NGO conducted over the years, thanks to a program they had that tried to give recommendations to farmers. And our project tried to take those surveys and the results from there and make some kind of recommendation engine to help farmers without the need for experts to go on field and actually spend that much time on each farm. To be honest, the result wasn't that good. I mean, wasn't that good. It wasn't. We didn't manage. It wasn't what we expected. We didn't manage to do that recommendation engine. What we managed to do was give recommendations for further data acquisition, because we realized one of the big challenges, was that the data collected did not match the goals we are trying to solve. And give further recommendations and help to the NGO however we could with the data they gave us.
So that was one of the biggest challenges, I assume, working with incomplete or missing data. And so how did you go about it, except for giving recommendations?
Personally stepping in, it was quite a strong transition from the ETH framework, where you have very clean data, where you're really at real world data. So that actually pushed us to get some new skills. In particular, we actually had to structure our project in a very clean way to be able to manage all those different data sources. We're talking about 10 data sources spread over the years that need to be joined. And that process, to keep it clean, structured, and actually usable, we had to learn a new tool, we learned a new framework, and that actually taught us data engineering quite well, I think. So that was a very good experience we got out of this.
And I think in the end that was one of our main results. We were able to do clean, reproducible code that under the data set they gave us, and on top of that they would be able to build different things.
That sounds very interesting indeed. Could you maybe elaborate a bit on what you would do when you got stuck, or where you didn't know where else to go?
I think we had mentors. I think there's two key points here. Is that first, the program, we had mentors. So they actually had experience. They're people from the industry with a lot of experience in that field, and they would help us here when we were basically at a crossroads. They could basically use their domain knowledge and say, well, that option, it won't work out, so really focus on that first, because that's where you'll get the best outcomes. And really from the get-go, we had that support on telling us, okay, remember to document all the remarks you have on the data. Remember to curate a structured code, because this is where the value of your work will be. And that was very, very useful. Perhaps the second option, and the most important to me, is that when we were stuck, we were actually working with the NGOs, and when we had a question about something in the data, of course we'd always go to the NGO so we could speak to them, have a conversation about our assumptions and what for them would be the best way ahead. And that was, I think, the most valuable part of the program, actually.
That's all.
No, exactly, and I feel like that's one thing we didn't do enough of. And if I were to do the program again, or if I had to give an advice, it would be that it's the idea. It's not a school project where you want to give a result. You want to do something useful, and that can evolve through time. And the best way to make sure you actually do something useful is to keep talking to the people that are gonna use it. And so yeah, I feel like if there's one thing I would do, it's be in contact even more often with the NGO.
That sounds very interesting. Was there anything else that you did during your Hack4Good time except for coding up, cleaning data, and doing data engineering?
I mean, we did learn some things about sustainable farming practices, which, I mean, I guess it's always the case when you do a data science project. You always learn a bit about the domain area, which is always interesting.
There were some cool workshops too.
There were cool workshops too.
We had one on agile methodologies that we actually used over the whole project afterwards. So that was quite interesting. And overall, there were some events around the program where we come up to get together, get some food for free, of course, and have a good time in general.
That sounds lovely. That sounds lovely. Is there could you maybe point out one highlight from Hack4Good, something that sticked in your mind for a longer time?
For me, I guess it would be the final presentations, because that's when you get to show all of your results, not only to your NGO but also to the other participants, to the other NGOs. And that's also where you get to see what the others have done, and that's always interesting because you've been following them through the various events organized by Hack4Good, but you aren't working with them, and to see the actual presentation at the end about like what was their problem, how did they solve it, etc. is always very interesting, and it's nice to see everyone.
I'd say I'm in a similar boat here. What really struck me about the final presentation is that you really, for one, saw the variety of problems that were at hand, and that was very interesting. And two, you saw how challenging each of them was, because every team would come up and say, well, we tried A, B, C, and that still didn't work, and eventually we got some results in our last attempt, and that was actually quite inspiring to see how people pushed forward and managed to get something despite there not being a clear way on how to get there always.
That sounds super interesting for sure. Can you maybe elaborate a bit more on how you worked on it in a team and how that impacted the work that you did, maybe even?
So Oscar and me were in a team with two other people, and none of them knew each other before Hack4Good. So we just got to know each other through the first events, and then, I mean, in a way that's kind of like a course project. You realize that you've got work to do. You set up meetings. During the meetings you divide tasks, and after a while you just realize that that's how you organize work. And of course, like a course project too, I'd say you end up being friends with the people you work with, and it was a very nice time to work with them.
I agree on every point. I think it was a very nice thing, and we had a very good vibe in the team. And maybe I'll add one more point, is that in a course project, you always know where you're going. Whereas here, you're working with a team, but you don't always know where you're going. So there's really this team discussion of, okay, what are we doing now? And that's really something that's very much additional to anything you'd find at ETH, and it's a very good experience on how to actually work with a team and manage the team, and how in general you approach a problem that's not well defined.
Yeah, and I guess another thing that was very interesting actually is that the team is quite interdisciplinary. So me and Oscar actually have kind of similar backgrounds, but we were working with a PhD student and another master student, but that was more towards the economics. And you are able to work with people that think differently, have different skills than you, and that's a lot more, that's really enriching, basically.
Excellent. Maybe one last question. Is there like one thing that you learned from Hack4Good for your life, maybe for your skill set? Is there something that you took away from this entire project?
I think my main takeaway is to not underestimate the non-technical side of data science. That is to say that you're working with people and you're trying to have a project that's going to do something in the world, and you need to make sure you understand the context of it, especially if you're trying to have a good impact. And the discussions with people that don't have a data science background are always important to have for the future of what you do. And yes.
Yeah, I think as a takeaway, that would be a strong one. Really, the importance of the human aspect, because this always boils down to human. And for example, in our case, you are still relying on those people in the field who are actually doing the work. You're just behind your computer in Switzerland, but there are people on the field in Kenya that were doing the work, and you need to be collaborating with them if you are going to have any impact. A second point which struck me quite a bit is that, especially in the humanitarian field, it's very possible to have a negative impact. So you need to do very significant risk management. For example, if you build a model, you want to know, okay, is this model going to fail maybe? Would it provide negative recommendations? Could it be used as adversarial purposes? There are cases where when you are playing with, you are having people's lives at hand, and so this is a completely different dimension than what you do normally at ETH.
Excellent. Thank you very much for your time.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks.